Happy July 2nd. Soon be celebrating America's birthday once again. It's a good time to be alive. I want to say that I'm very pleased to have been asked by Reverend Sandy to speak today. We have an interlude now from our time of our transitional minister to whatever the future brings, which may be a permanent minister. We have our thoughts and hopes on that possibility. I want to particularly thank a few people for helping me have the courage to be here today. First of all, my buddy Joan Morgan, with whom I've served on the board in the past. Joan was always very encouraging when I would be platform assistant and have little mini sermons open. I'd feel moved to say something, and it always worked out, and it seemed appropriate. Also, we're very fortunate in this congregation, considering the size of it, to have a licensed Unity teacher, Kaywood Black, who's here today, who has always inspired us with beautifully crafted messages, well-researched, beautifully delivered, touch of humor, and always adhering to Unity principles. As well as Roy Berkowitz, one of my favorites as well. Roy has spoken to us many times and has always had a gift of being able to relay a very personal story of dealing with difficulty, dealing with his own demons and his own challenges, and again, just the right touch of Unity principles and humor. Something to make us all think, yeah, I know what you mean, and I have the same problem, and maybe I can take care of it too. So thank you for being inspiring. We do listen, we hear what you say. I appreciate it. I want to thank Sarah for being wingman today. Sarah's developed into a beautiful platform assistant. I think she's just fantastic. We even coordinate our wardrobes now. Also, thank you to Harley for the gift of her beautiful voice, and to Barbara for leading us in our musical endeavors. You may not always think about it, but music underpins everything that we do here, and it's just beautiful, just beautiful. And finally, I want to thank today's usher, whom I think is sitting in the back. Helen, are you today's usher? Oh no, Rosemarie. Rosemarie is our usher today, right? Rosemarie, thank you for that beautiful face and that huge smile when we come in. Thank you for being here. And finally, to our prayer chaplain and our prayer chaplaincy team in general, Rod. Because again, like music, prayer is fundamental to what we do. All these things have been an influence on me. And when I walk out that door every Sunday, they stay with me. It sustains me through the week. So, my talk today is about courage. Especially now that we as a congregation have chosen to consciously move towards having a spiritual leader after many years of doing it on our own. I find that to be very courageous. To be led by a board that has been fearless in exploring the possibilities and thinking of all the possibilities of the benefits of a minister. I thank you. It takes courage to do these things. It also takes courage just to live, as you know. Courage is not something we take for granted because it's very important. And I'm going to talk about courage a little bit. I'm going to tell a few stories, one from the Old Testament, one from the Hebrew Talmud, that highlights the message about courage that I have for you. I'm also going to quote some things from popular culture, from classical literature, a little bit of everything, as well as adding some context from Unity. What does Unity say about courage? So what is it? Well, courage, the word, is from the Old French, courage. I hope my Francophile friends are not laughing when I pronounce it that way. So courage, the Old French, is in itself from Latin, coeur, which means heart. And in fact, the modern French word for heart is cœur, very similar. Courage is one of those qualities that has always been associated with the heart in ancient times. You know that the phrase take heart means have courage, be courageous. We know that a lot of professions today in the world require courage. If you're a firefighter, a police officer, security officer, a soldier, a bodyguard, any kind of first responder, a teacher. You have to have courage. But what about everybody else? What about us? I've been thinking about that a lot because, well, you know, as truth students, we've learned that you tend to gravitate towards the things that you need. And I discovered that when I was preparing a talk that I needed to talk about courage because that's something that I need myself. I've not always been a very courageous person. And so this message is for me as well as for you. And I hope I'm listening to it. How can I have more courage? How can I push fear away? How can I live a more courageous life? You know those times, we call them the dark nights of the soul, when you're alone and you're scared and something terrible is happening to you, or that's what you perceive. Those are the times when being courageous is crucial. You have to be able to act. You have to be able to move yourself forward, even though everything seems to be against you. I've had those times. We all have. Sometimes I've succeeded in doing something good and being proud of myself. Sometimes I've not. But every day, I witness people around me, regular people, who do amazing things, not because they want attention, but because they're brave. And they act courageously. And I notice these things. So I think, how can I be more like them? So this is essentially a message about the courage of everyday life. It's about regular people displaying amazing characteristics. I don't know if you can see this clearly, but I happened across it when I was doing my research. It seems to be a group of men standing on a very small platform, something like 40 stories in the air. And you can see buildings around them that are not even as tall as the space where they're standing. I don't know if this is real. I don't know. But it's amazing. Is it real? Do you know about this? Yeah, iron workers. I just found that to be an amusing and amazing illustration of what courage can be, because I don't think these are firefighters. I think these are iron workers. These are people who build buildings for a living. But could you do that? Could you be 40 stories up on a little platform that's barely big enough for 6 or 7 people? I don't know. It's an illustration. Just something that makes me think about courage. Now, I thought about a few examples of what situations require courage. And you know these because these are things that come up in every life at some point. Leaving a job. Sometimes that takes amazing courage. At my workplace right now, not to talk about myself, but since January, we've been undergoing something in my association called purposeful abandonment. It's a very strange phrase. It sounds so lovely. But the word abandon is in there. And what it means is that we have a deficit. We have a financial deficit. And we have to cut some things. So we are going to decide which programs we offer that will no longer be offered after this year. Those will be eliminated or purposefully abandoned because it sounds so nice. But what we have to realize is that the people associated with those programs will also be purposefully abandoned. So it's been a very tense year because my association's been around for 100 years and we've been doing very well. Microbiology is the source of what we do, and it's done very well because it has applications to everyday life. It's everywhere. But there are trends in the world. People don't want to pay as much for subscriptions to magazines. They don't want to go to meetings as much as they used to. And we're finding that our revenues are sliding. So to do what we need to do, we have to eliminate some things. So we've all been told since January in various meetings and various formats that we have to prepare for some of us to not be here after the end of this year. We still don't know who those people are. It should be sometime in the next month now, I understand. But what I'm seeing, in addition to anxiety and concern, is acts of kindness and acts of courage. People are saying, You know, if somebody has to be abandoned in my department, you could consider abandoning me, because I think I could make it. I think my colleagues need to be here, but I think I could take it. And that's happened a couple of times, and I've been really impressed with that behavior. Self-sacrifice, purely because they want to help someone else. Other examples of courage: ending a relationship. I don't know if you've done that, but boy, that takes courage. Emotions are at play. Sometimes finance, sometimes children. Very complicated situation, and it takes certain courage to be able to do it respectfully, but to also honor yourself. Leaving the city, perhaps the country of your birth, starting a new life somewhere else. I've moved in my lifetime, but within my own country. But there are those who have left their own country, and that takes courage, even if there's an opportunity. Telling your parents that you're gay, that is not an easy thing to do. The 30 seconds that follow can be the longest, most painful time in your life. Getting to the point of telling them, that takes courage. Telling a supervisor or a director, somebody who has some authority over you in a workplace environment or something like that, that what they're doing is not appropriate, has to stop, and to be willing to suffer the consequences. That takes courage. Courage is fundamentally letting go of the ego, entertaining something unfamiliar, something bigger than your experience, something that on its face may be of no particular value or benefit to you. In fact, it might threaten your well-being. In the fight or flight response that biologists talk about, it is sometimes the choice to stand. Roy has given us some beautiful talks in the past about confronting fear and doubt in oneself, and I've listened to those. They've been very helpful to me. Sometimes he uses as an example a classical story, The Wizard of Oz. It's one of those stories that on the superficial part of it just seems to be a funny story or a children's story, but it's got a lot of depth to it if you explore it. And I happened to stop and look at that because I thought, there is something in The Wizard of Oz about courage that I might be able to use to illustrate a point today. So, the Cowardly Lion. You know the Cowardly Lion from The Wizard of Oz? He's one of the main characters who becomes a friend of Dorothy. Dorothy is the seeker who's moving through the story, looking for something. She's trying to find her way back home. And as she travels, she finds 3 other characters who are all seeking something as well. The Cowardly Lion is seeking courage. It's ironic because he's a lion. He's supposed to be the king of the jungle, the bravest animal. He's not. And there's an exchange among them that's quite amusing, and I'd like to participate in that with you if you don't mind, because it will help bring out some of the substance of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to play the part of the Cowardly Lion, and I'm going to throw out questions. And when I raise my hand, I would like you to respond if you don't mind. And the answer is simple. It's courage. You want to try it? Sure. Okay. What makes a king out of a slave?
Courage.
What makes the flag on the mast to wave?
Courage.
What makes the elephant charge his tusk in the misty mist or the dusky dusk? What makes the muskrat guard his musk? Courage. What makes the Sphinx the 7th wonder?
Courage.
What makes the dawn come up like thunder?
Courage.
What makes the Hottentot so hot? What puts the ape in apricot? What have they got that I ain't got?
Courage.
You can say that again.
Courage.
Thank you. That was a good illustration to me. I also looked around to see examples of courage, in quotations, famous statements, because it helps me come together with a message. So listen to this one. This is anonymous, but I thought it was good. Courage is fear that has said its prayers. Here's one from Mark Twain. Courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, but not the absence of fear. Do you remember that saying that Unity has the acronym FEAR? Remember what that stands for? Amal used to say this. False evidence appearing real. It's a good statement. Winston Churchill said that courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. Robert Louis Stevenson, whom we heard music based upon recently, he said, keep your fears to yourself, but share your courage with others. And then lastly, in the quotation category, Rosa Parks, the First Lady of Civil Rights, the mother of the freedom movement. She said, I have learned over the years that when one's mind is made up, this diminishes fear. Knowing what must be done does away with fear. Now, she doesn't mention the word courage, but that's exactly what courage is. And that also made me think, because if you remember what happened to her, she was a woman in Alabama who, at the time was forced to ride in the back of the bus because she was African American. And at one point, the bus driver asked her to move so that a white person could take her seat, and he wanted her to move to the back. And she refused. She refused. And some popular stories say that she just refused because she was physically tired. That's what some of the stories say, but apparently not. What I found is that she said, I was tired of giving in. So she decided to demonstrate courage. And her thoughts about this situation brought to mind practical Christianity. Because practical Christianity, as we know, is doing things. It's not just saying things and believing, it's doing. It's putting into practice what you believe. And what a great demonstration of putting into practice what she believes. But Rosa Parks defied the times. She risked imprisonment, she risked persecution because she didn't want to give in. That's practical Christianity and courage. Charles Fillmore says that courage is a spiritual quality that enables one to remain poised and centered in God amidst great difficulties and danger. The realization that Almighty God of the universe is a spiritual presence which is constantly striving to express in and through us fills us with a new courage and a fearlessness that is beyond description. I also found from Charles Fillmore a publication called True Courage. And I just want to read a little bit of what that said. And this is Charles Fillmore. True courage is courage as it functions in truth. Every faculty has a twofold action, within and without. As we analyze the various ideas that enter into our everyday life, we find that they all have a true and false side, a positive and a negative side. Thus, even our virtues appear negative when separated from the absolute. In considering the faculties of mind, we get the best concept of them if we work from the absolute, separating each faculty from relative conditions and drawing it to an expression in our mind unrelated to other faculties. True courage is not bravado. It is not nerve. It is not indifference to suffering. Courage is not generally estimated at its true value because we do not understand its spiritual quality. True spiritual courage will lift us above every hindrance, even that of an accusing conscience that refuses to remit past sins and keeps us in a state of self-condemnation and remorse. And here's the punchline. True courage looks to God for the solution to every problem. So, I keep finding this thread of courage leading back to faith and God. And remember, Reverend Sandy was very insistent that we remember that God is the source of everything. Whenever we have a problem, we should always go to God first. Not to other people, not to our own thoughts, but to God. I'd like to next read briefly from the Old Testament, the book of Daniel. You've probably heard the story of Daniel in the lion's den. And this is a good example of courage in the context of God. Essentially, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so the king might suffer no loss. Daniel became distinguished above all the high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then, the high officials and satraps sought to find ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Well, I won't read the whole thing, but essentially, Daniel becomes prominent because he's faithful and he's talented. And of course, he engenders the jealousy of others, and they conspire to bring him down. But because he is without fault, it's very difficult for them to do so. So they come up with a ruse, and they go to the king and they say, "We believe that you should issue an edict that anybody in the kingdom is not allowed to worship or pray or give homage to anyone but you, the king." And the king thought that sounded good. Okay, sure, put that into effect. Well, of course, the first time Daniel opened the windows towards Jerusalem to pray, these men pounced, dragged him before the king and said, "He's in violation of the edict that you just passed." And because this was inflexible, according to the story, the king could not change it. And so Daniel was punished. He was thrown into a den of lions, which was sealed. And the king didn't like this and was horrified and said to Daniel, "I hope that your God will save you because you're so faithful." And Daniel didn't seem concerned. Daniel spent the night in the lion's den. And I mean, it's a story, but imagine that. It's got to be a little scary. And meanwhile, the king who loves Daniel, but was trapped by his own edict, spends the night in panic and anxiety, wondering what will happen to him. The next day, before dawn, the king goes to this place and has the door unsealed and yells in there, "Daniel, are you alive? Has your God saved you?" And Daniel answers, "Yes, my God has saved me because I pray to my God and I'm faithful, and nothing can harm me." Well, as often happens in these Old Testament stories where there's a lot of serious retribution, the king then orders that the men who implicated Daniel as being guilty, their children, their wives, and all their families be thrown into the lion's den. Yeah, and they were all apparently killed before they even reached the bottom. Their bones were broken in pieces, it says. That story illustrates, of course, if you look at it metaphysically, faith, good judgment, and courage. The lions represent poor thoughts, jealousy. Even the king represents something. The king represents will, although the will is weak and can be subjected to influences outside. So the will was affected in this case by jealousies. But Daniel's judgment and courage held fast. So, to sum up, essentially, courage is a quality that you don't have to be born with. It can be encouraged in you. In fact, the word encourage means to put courage in. So when we encourage each other, we are putting courage in each other. Courage comes from the heart, theoretically. And the heart is also the seat of love. Courage and love are bound together. And like all things, courage comes from faith and belief in God. Because if you believe in God, as Daniel did, no matter what happens to you, nothing can harm you, really. So Daniel's an example of that. Even in if you know the Serenity Prayer, beautiful Serenity Prayer, courage is part of that prayer. I'm just going to read the first part of it. This is the old version. There's a newer version that sounds a little different. But God give us grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to take one from the other. So courage is definitely required to get through. And finally, if I can find it, I found something from literature that I thought was appropriate for us as a group, because we're demonstrating courage as a congregation. And I've said that before, and I'm impressed that we are taking the journey together to seek a spiritual leader, to maintain our integrity as a congregation, and to welcome other people, because other people in the world can really benefit from this message. So this is a quote from Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And this is us. So when you hear the words our and us, this is Community on the Hill. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be that we shall touch the happy isle and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved heaven and earth, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. That's courage. Thank you.